Carlos woke up before the sun that cold autumn morning. The muffled sound of cars on the avenue in the distance was no longer the alarm that got him out of bed, but the constant restlessness in his mind. At age 50, he was living through what could be the worst time of his life. For almost 3 decades, he worked as a sales manager at a large electronics company in São Paulo, a job that supported his family and gave him a comfortable life. But the stability he cherished evaporated in the blink of an eye. It all started about a year ago, when the economy started to slow down. The electronics sector was one of the hardest hit, and the company where Carlos worked was forced to cut costs. When the layoffs began, Carlos still believed that, with his experience and dedication, he would be spared. He had built a solid career, with an impeccable sales record and a respectful relationship with his superiors. But on Friday, which was supposed to be just another day at work, he was called into his boss's office. The serious expression of the human resources director left no doubt. Carlos, who had always been a man of many words, found himself without reaction when he heard the words that decreed the end of his stability. "Unfortunately, we need to make cuts, your department will be restructured, and your position has been made redundant." The words echoed in his mind as he tried to absorb the impact of that decision. Within minutes, everything he knew was destroyed. Back home that afternoon, Carlos held a small box of his belongings in his hand. The journey home, which used to be a moment of relief after a long day of work, now seemed endless. Every traffic stop was a cruel reminder of what he had lost. When he entered the house, Marta was waiting for him in the kitchen. The smile she always gave him when she returned from work was replaced by an expression of concern when she saw the box he was carrying. The children were at school, so Carlos sat with her at the kitchen table and, with a trembling voice, explained the situation. "I got fired, Marta. I don't know what we're going to do now." The months that followed were tough. Carlos, who had always been the family's financial pillar, now spent his days sending out resumes and attending interviews that led nowhere. Each refusal was a blow to his pride, and the pressure to find a new job began to take its toll on his health. The severance money and savings that he and Marta had saved over the years began to run out quickly. Desperate to keep their home and pay their bills, they had to make difficult choices. Fancy dinners were replaced by simple meals and, eventually, rice and bean dishes. Weekend getaways, which used to be a relief from the routine, have become rarities. The home mortgage, which had once seemed like a manageable installment, was now a mounting debt, threatening everything they had built together. Marta, trying to maintain the family's morale, began looking for sporadic work to supplement her income. She, who previously dedicated herself exclusively to taking care of the house and children, found herself cleaning houses and doing odd jobs to put food on the table. Meanwhile, Carlos tried, unsuccessfully, to hide his frustration. The humiliation of not being able to support his family was a heavy burden that kept him awake most nights. The children, although protected from many details, noticed the changes. They asked less about the promised toys and trips, and more about when everything would return to normal. Carlos, however, had no answers to give. The future, which once seemed certain, was now a frightening unknown. But amid all this chaos, Carlos couldn't completely lose hope. He knew he needed to find a way out, not just for himself, but for the family he loved so much. He couldn't allow himself to give up, even if circumstances said otherwise. However, little did Carlos know that destiny had different plans, and that the solution to his problems would come from where he least expected it. Carlos' days continued to drag on in a monotonous repetition of worries and frustrated attempts to find a new job. The atmosphere at home, once full of laughter and plans for the future, had become heavy, filled with uncertainties that seemed to multiply with each new demand letter that arrived in the mail. One morning, while drinking his coffee, Carlos found himself looking at the dining table. It was a simple piece, made of dark wood, but for him, it represented something much bigger. He clearly remembered the day he and Marta bought it, shortly after they got married. It was the first piece of furniture they chose together, a symbol of the beginning of a new life. Now that table seemed like a monument to everything that was about to fall apart. Marta entered the kitchen, interrupting her thoughts. She had a shopping list in her hands, the items carefully written down to ensure they didn't exceed her tight budget. "Can you stop by the grocery store later?" she asked, her tone gentle but tired. Carlos nodded, trying to mask the anguish he felt at not being able to do more. In the afternoon, he took the list and left. The market, a place he used to frequent without much thought, was now a minefield of temptations that he knew he couldn't give in to. When pushing the cart through the aisles, Carlos made a point of choosing the cheapest options, remembering every penny spent. It was then that, in the drinks aisle, a bottle of wine caught his attention. He stopped, almost without realizing it, and picked up the bottle. It was a wine he used to buy on special occasions. Carlos stayed there for a few minutes, holding the bottle, lost in thought. He remembered the birthdays, the small celebrations, how that wine had been part of so many happy moments. Without thinking much, he placed the bottle in the cart and headed to the register. He paid the bill, feeling a little relief when he saw that he hadn't gone over budget, and went home. When Marta saw the wine, her expression changed. "Carlos, why did you buy this? We can't afford to spend on wine right now." Marta's question hit Carlos like a punch. He knew she was right, but at the same time, he needed that small gesture, that memory of better times. I just wanted something to remind me that things can still be good," he replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. Marta sighed. She understood what he meant, but reality did not allow them such a luxury. "You need to give it back," she said, firmly but with a look full of compassion. Carlos knew that Marta was right. Without arguing, he took the bottle and returned to the market. On the way, his heart was heavy. He felt defeated, not only by his financial situation, but by his inability to provide his family with something as simple as a moment of comfort. Arriving at the market, he went to the returns counter. The employee, a friendly young woman, served him quickly, returning the purchase money. Carlos put his change in his pocket and, as he was getting ready to leave, something caught his attention. Near the entrance, a large poster announced an end-of-year draw, with $1 million prize. What else could I lose? He hesitated for a moment, but something inside him urged him to try. He took the refund money and approached the lottery counter. "Give me 2 tickets," he said, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and hope. What Carlos didn't know was that that small, seemingly trivial decision would be the beginning of a turnaround that he could never have imagined. Carlos returned home with the 2 lottery tickets in his pocket. He didn't mention anything to Marta, knowing that she wouldn't understand what led him to spend the little money they had recovered on a raffle, especially at such a critical time. For him, however, there was a spark of hope in those pieces of paper, a hope he didn't want to extinguish with the harsh realities they faced. The days passed without major events. Carlos' routine remained the same, sending resumes, looking for job openings that seemed increasingly scarce, and trying not to lose faith. But the truth is that with each failed interview, each negative response, his despair increased. One Saturday morning, when Carlos was outside washing his car, he remembered the notes. They were still where he had left them, in a small drawer in the dresser next to the bed. He decided, almost on impulse, that it was time to check the numbers. The sun was strong, and the heat from the asphalt made the work of washing the car even more tiring, but Carlos needed a break for something that would give him a modicum of encouragement. He entered the house, drying his hands on the cloth he had over his shoulder. Marta was in the kitchen, taking care of lunch, and the children were watching TV in the living room. Carlos quickly went upstairs, grabbed the tickets, and went back downstairs, where the television was broadcasting the noon news. With the first ticket in hand, Carlos went to the automatic verification machine installed in the neighborhood grocery store. He inserted the ticket and saw that, as expected, he had not won anything. He was not surprised, as he knew the probability of winning was minimal. He put the second ticket in the machine, without waiting for more than another "not winning" message. But, to his surprise, the machine's display gave a different message. Winning ticket. Consult an employee. Carlos blinked several times, thinking he had read it wrong. Winning ticket? Like this? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He called the attendant, a young boy who worked at the grocery store, and asked him to check the ticket. The boy entered the ticket number into the terminal and, upon seeing the result, his expression changed from indifference to complete surprise. "Sir, you won. You won the main prize." Carlos felt his legs weaken and held on to the counter to keep from falling. "As?" he asked, barely speaking. 200 million reis, replied the attendant, almost as shocked as Carlos. The news fell like a bomb in his mind. He stood there, trying to process what had just happened. How could a simple act of returning a bottle of wine lead to such an unbelievable turn of events? He could hardly believe that, after everything he had been through, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. Fortune, which seemed to have abandoned him for so long, finally smiled on him. Carlos left the market with the winning ticket in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he needed to tell Marta, but he wanted to do it the right way. This was the news that could change everything for them, and he wanted to share it with the same emotion he was feeling. As Carlos crossed the street back home, he couldn't wait to reveal the surprise that was about to transform their lives. But would everything be as simple as it seemed? Carlos walked back home with the winning ticket in his pocket, feeling that life, for the first time in a long time, was offering him a second chance. His heart was beating fast, a mixture of excitement and nervousness took over him. How am I going to tell Marta this, he thought, knowing that the news would forever change the course of their lives. But along with the euphoria came the weight of responsibility. Upon arriving home, Carlos entered and noticed the silence that hung in the air. The children, normally noisy and full of energy, were focused on the TV, while Marta finished lunch. He walked to the kitchen, where Marta was stirring a pot on the stove. She turned to him and noticed something different in his face. "Is everything okay, Carlos?" The concern in his voice was evident. Carlos smiled, but it wasn't just any smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to share the best news of their lives. "Marta, I need to tell you something," he said, trying to remain calm. "Sit here for a moment." Marta, without really understanding, put down the spoon and sat at the table, looking at him expectantly. Carlos sat in front of her, holding her hands in his. "I bought 2 lottery tickets with the wine return money," he began, watching her reaction. Marta frowned, as if she wasn't sure where he was going. "And one of those tickets won the top prize. Marta, we won 200 million reis." The silence in the kitchen was almost deafening. Marta looked at Carlos, trying to process the words he had just said. "As? Carlos, are you serious?" She tugged on his hands, as if to make sure it wasn't a bad joke. "I'm serious, Marta. I checked the ticket, and the attendant confirmed it. It's real. We won." Carlos repeated, feeling emotion rising within him. Marta stood up abruptly, putting her hands to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears of relief and disbelief. "My God! Carlos, is this true?" She began to cry, the tears falling uncontrollably, as he stood up and hugged her tightly. "And truth. Finally, we can breathe a sigh of relief. We can get out of this situation," he whispered, holding her as they both took in the magnitude of what this meant. They hugged each other, both crying, but this time they were not tears of despair, but of pure happiness and gratitude. What came next was a mix of careful planning and dreams that could finally come true. Carlos and Marta's lives were about to change in unimaginable ways, but they both knew they needed to keep their feet on the ground, even in the face of so much fortune. They had a new chance to build the future they always wanted for themselves and their children, and they didn't intend to waste it. But, with great gains come great responsibilities, and Carlos and Marta would soon realize that, despite their fortune, life still held challenges that they would need to face together. Carlos and Marta spent the following days immersed in a new reality. The news of the award brought immediate relief, but it also sparked a whirlwind of emotions and concerns. The first step was to ensure that the fortune was safe. With the prize in hand, they consulted lawyers and financial planners to ensure the money was well managed and protected. However, they soon realized that with wealth came new responsibilities and challenges. The news of the award didn't take long to spread, and soon people started looking for them, from distant family members to old coworkers, all wanting help. Carlos, who had always valued his privacy and tranquility, now found himself in the center of attention, which caused him great discomfort. The relationship between Carlos and Marta also began to suffer from the pressures of their new life. Decisions that were once simple, such as where to invest or how to handle requests for financial aid, have become sources of tension. Marta, in turn, wanted to use part of the money to guarantee her children's future, while Carlos felt the need to help close relatives who were also going through difficulties. The discussions, which were previously about how to stretch the money until the end of the month, now revolved around how to deal with an unimaginable fortune. Additionally, the sudden change in family dynamics brought to light issues they had never faced before. The children, accustomed to a modest life, now had greater expectations. They wanted to take advantage of their new wealth, travel, buy things that were previously inaccessible. Carlos and Marta needed to find a balance between providing a comfortable life for their children and teaching them the value of money. Every day, Carlos realized that money, although it solved many problems, also created others. He missed the simplicity, the life he had before becoming a millionaire. The fortune brought financial security, but also a new layer of complexity that he and Marta needed to learn to navigate. Carlos and Marta would need to learn to deal with the changes in their lives and find a new balance. Would money bring lasting happiness or take them away from what really matters? As the months passed, Carlos and Marta found themselves increasingly involved in a moral dilemma. While money brought them a new sense of security, it also brought up external expectations and pressures that they had never experienced before. Helping others was something they both valued, but the reality of having to say no to some people who came for help began to weigh on them. Carlos has always been known for being generous, and this generosity, which previously manifested itself in small gestures, now had a new meaning. He wanted to help friends who supported him through difficult times and family members who were also struggling. But he soon realized that, for many, his kindness was seen as an obligation. People began to expect large donations, investments, or even extravagant gifts, and when Carlos tried to explain that he needed to be prudent with money, there were looks of disappointment and veiled criticism. Marta, on the other hand, was worried about the impact of wealth on her family, especially her children. She began to notice changes in their behavior. What was once a natural understanding of financial limitations now seemed to give way to a mentality of unrestrained consumption. They wanted the best cell phones, branded clothes, luxurious trips. And, for Marta, this was a warning sign. She feared that her children were losing their sense of reality, and this tormented her. One night, after yet another discussion about how to deal with the requests for help that kept coming in, Carlos sat on the porch of the house he had recently purchased. He looked at the city in the distance, the lights twinkling like reminders of a life that, although difficult, now seemed almost simpler. The weight of his decisions was starting to take a toll. He felt like he was moving away from who he was before the award. Fortune, which he believed would bring only happiness, was demanding more sacrifices than he had ever imagined. Marta joined him on the porch, bringing a cup of tea. She sat next to Carlos, both of them in silence for a moment, just listening to the night sounds of the city. "Carlos," she began, her voice soft but firm, "we need to find a way to keep what matters to us. This money, It can't change us, it can't take us away from who we are. Carlos nodded, knowing she was right. I just don't want to disappoint anyone, Marta. I don't want them to think I'm forgetting where we came from. You would never do that, she said, shaking his hand. But we also can't please everyone. We need to think about ourselves, about our family. Money can be a blessing or a curse, it depends on how we choose to use it. The couple knew they needed to establish clear limits and define how to deal with the new reality. But, in a world where money and power go hand in hand, would it be possible to maintain the integrity and values you have always valued? With the immense fortune now in hand, Carlos and Marta found themselves at a crucial point in their lives, where every decision needed to be made carefully. After long and reflective conversations, the couple decided that the best way to use the money would be to secure their children's future and build something that would keep them close to their roots. The first step was to pay off all the debts that had been haunting them for years. The house's mortgage was paid in full, and the children's education expenses were covered, giving them the possibility of studying without the worries that Carlos and Marta had faced. However, the couple was determined to keep their children grounded, teaching them the importance of valuing hard work and humility. Carlos, despite now being a wealthy man, has never forgotten his days working as a sales manager. He always dreamed of having his own business, something that could support his family without depending on large corporations or the volatile job market. They then decided to open a small wine store, a business that combined Carlos' personal taste with the security of a lasting investment. The store, called Adega do Lar, was designed as a family enterprise, where everyone could get involved and learn. Carlos would take care of administration and purchasing, while Marta would take care of customer service, always with a smile on her face and welcoming advice. The children, now more aware of the value of money, would help out on weekends and school holidays, learning about responsibility and teamwork. Although the business was an initial success, the couple remained true to their commitment to living simply. They avoided extravagant expenses and chose to continue living in the same house, just making the necessary renovations to make it more comfortable. The life of luxury was not attractive to them, they preferred the stability and peace that fortune provided them. Over time, the store became a gathering place for the local community, a place where people not only bought wine but also shared stories and felt at home. Carlos and Marta, seeing their store prosper, felt fulfilled. They had found a balance between enjoying the blessings of life and keeping their roots firm in the soil of reality. Despite the newfound stability, new challenges would arise, testing Carlos and Marta's determination to maintain the simplicity and values they have always cherished. How will they deal with the temptations that wealth can still bring? Carlos and Marta's wine store flourished every day, becoming a reference in the community. The couple, always discreet, continued to live modestly, and wealth never took them away from their values and roots. They learned to deal with the pressures and temptations that money brought, focusing on what really mattered, family unity and the well-being of their children. As time passed, the Souza family prospered. The store expanded, and the business was managed by the children, who absorbed their parents' teachings about humility and hard work. Carlos and Marta, now in their 60s, began to make more use of their free time, dedicating themselves to social causes and helping the community in ways that made a difference. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood where they built their life, Carlos and Marta stopped in front of the store. They looked at the Adega do Lar sign and smiled, knowing that there was more than a simple business there. There was a story of overcoming, love and resilience. They managed to turn a difficult time into an opportunity for growth, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. The story of Carlos and Marta is a reminder that true wealth is not in money, but in relationships, values, and the ability to overcome challenges with courage and humility. And so, with hearts at peace and the certainty that they had built something lasting, they closed this chapter of their lives, ready to embrace whatever the future held for them. End. If you were inspired by this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to know what lessons you learned and how these characters' journeys resonated with your own experience. And don't forget to subscribe to our Story in History channel to follow more inspiring stories like this. Stay tuned for our next narratives, where there will certainly always be a new intriguing plot about human tragicomedy. Get ready to get involved in plots full of mysteries and twists that will certainly capture your imagination. Click on the Story in History channel playlist and enjoy. Thanks.